I'm going to work on a landscape painting in watercolor. And let me see, this is the painting. So I'll show you how I work my idea and the steps that I take in the process of working on this particular watercolor. It's basically pretty monochromatic. I use the color palette as blues and greens and maybe a little bit of a complement of some reds to darken some of the greens. So I'll show you how I worked on that particular painting, and hopefully you might be able to get a few things out of it as I go through the process. So this paper has a slight buff color to it. It's not like it's not a bright, extremely bright white. You can see when you look at the edge here, this is like a really bright white. So you can see like a little bit of difference of the color of the paper. Also, the surface of the watercolor paper has a slight tooth to it, but it's not as toothy as Winsor Newton or even I find that Arches paper. It doesn't have that as much of a tooth to it. So I'm going to experiment with this paper and see how I like working with this paper. So I'm going to frame it down now. I have my little T-square that has these little markings on it. I'm going to make it an 8 by 10, just something small. And let's make a couple of marks here. Then I'm going to tape around the border. So I put a border around it. It's just something about having a border around your picture. This is this tape that you can get from Home Depot, and you put this border around it. Then when you take it off, you'll have a nice, almost like a nice framed look to it. I'm going to do something maybe like a simple landscape that anybody can do. And if you're an adult, you can do it also. But so we'll start out with something pretty simple. And I'm using good paper, so for my water, I'm going to put them in these Faber-Castell watercolor cups. See, they collapse down. This is no commercial, but these are cool because it has these little ridges on the top, and you can put your brush on there and you can get a nice quantity of water. I actually have two. One of them would have like for mixing paint, clean water, and the other one for dirty water. So these are some of the brushes that I'll be using. I have some basic brushes. I have a round, flat, small brush. These are my colors right here, the watercolors. And these are the two containers that I'm going to use for the paint. One I'm going to use for dirty water and one for clean water. And that's it. I'm not going to use any fancy brushes. These are just your regular kind of basic brushes. So this one right here I'm going to use for washes. This one is a flat brush. And these two are round. So if you have only one brush, this is good. Just use a round brush like this one. One good brush. And take good care of your brushes. When you finish, wash them out and they'll last for years. So it's good to have a picture that you can work from. It could be a simple picture, and you don't have to stick with the picture. You can change the picture. I'll show you. I'm going to change this picture. I'm going to frame it different ways with it. So I'm just going to cut out a couple of L's. I'll show you what I do with these L's. And these are just kind of rough. You can make yours neater than me. I'm just going to make 2 L's. And these L's could go in my toolbox for making pictures. So I was showing you how I might want to reframe this picture. So let's zoom in a little bit. And I can take my L and put it here. Do that, or I can bring it down a little bit and kind of like make a different picture out of it. So you can move it around. You can take your L's and move them around. You can make them closer, wider. So this gives you a lot of different options when you're looking at a scene, and how you can make the scene look. So I'm going to use this one, and I just went ahead and see, I just taped the hinges together, and I taped it like this. So now what I'll do is I'm going to draw. Now what I'm going to start with the big shapes. I'm just going to look at the big shapes when I make the drawing. And with watercolor, you want to take your time in making your drawing. And because once you get your drawing down, then that'll be your basic foundation. If we were to paint this with oil painting, I would probably might approach it a little bit differently. But since we're working with watercolor, we have to have our drawing down pretty good. So take your time with your drawing. Okay, so I'm going to take my time and make this sketch. So what I'll do is, like the first thing I'll do is just make these lines here. So we can start out with some simple lines for the trunks of the tree. And when you look at the trunks of the tree, you see that they're thin. They're not real thick. So we want to make them kind of thin so that they look nice when you put the leaves around them. So I'm going to look at this and look at the spacing, and I see like maybe one tree over in this area, and then another tree. I just make the lines, but I'm not going to make them straight up and down, kind of curvy, a little curvy. And I'll make another tree here, down here, and let's see. So I'm going to make these lines. I made the exposure a little bit. I'll change the exposure later, but when we're making the drawings, it's hard to see it on the computer. So here are these lines, and then I have this line here for this tree. And the trunks of the trees, I paint them last. I paint them near the end. So it kind of keeps it, kind of gives it that fun effect. Because when we paint, we want to have fun. So here, and then I'll look and I see this shape here. So with artists, we look at shapes. So I want to see that shape. And that's one shape where one of the tree in its branches will be. Then I see this kind of this shape here that's being made. So I'll bring in that shape over here. And then I see another, like a kind of a dark shape here. And I'll bring that shape in. And bring that in over here. And then the bottom of the tree, because the light's hitting the tree, it makes a shadow, and it's more like an oval shape. So I'll bring in that oval shape. I'll put in one here, and bring in another oval shape here, and another kind of like an oval shape here. And then I look up here at the sky coming in, and I can see a little bit of the sky coming in. So I'll bring in where that sky is coming in, and just kind of like make that into like almost like a triangular shape. So everything has these simple, we stick with simple shape, a curved shape, lines, straight lines, oval shapes. Here's another oval shape, some thin lines down for the tree trunks. Now, once you get these simple shapes together, now it's time to go in for the detail. Now you take your time and try to, figure out where those leaves, how you want the leaves. You remember, like this is an oval shape, but this nature, the branches and the leaves, they're going to be in that shape, but they have the leaf shapes. And the shadow even, although I looked at the shadow and I saw the oval shape, but the leaves inside that shadow are leaf shapes. So we want to make those into like little leaf shapes. And the same thing here with this shadow. It has like little leaf shapes. So we want to keep those leaf shapes for the shadows. And I'm looking at this tree right here. Each tree has its own distinctive quality. And I notice that this tree here is more like a pine tree. But it's not like it's not like a big triangle. This pine tree kind of goes straight up. So, but I have that shape here. So I'm going to make it shapes like a pine tree. Curve it in, lines coming out, lines going in like that. And then we're going to paint. Well, the watercolor is nice. It's that you don't have to paint all of the little details. You can kind of have fun with the details. And then the branches. So this gives me an idea where the sky's coming in. But it's not like a perfect triangle, but that was just to help me with the shapes. Now I know it's like leaf shapes. And these are leaf shapes. And then we have this tree here. Right in here, that shape. So I want to get that shape in. What's important about watercolor is that by knowing this, where this shape is, I know that I won't put a lot of bright color in there, or dark color in there, I'm sorry. I'm going to put in lighter color in there. So I'm just going to get an idea where that's going. Get those shapes in place. And then there was a path going around. So there was a water going in the background here. So I want to make sure, even if I have to draw through where the trees are, I want to see that water. And I want to try to maybe keep that water horizon straight. If you notice that my horizon line is a little below the middle. So that's a little bit of a compositional trick that we do to make it for a nice picture. Now the path on this picture is going across. Now in your picture you could change it if you want. If you want to make the path come down, I may try this path going across. I'm so used to changing the path and making it go down like this for perspective. Maybe I might do that. So I'll bring the path down. And so I'll start out narrow at the top, and then I'll bring it down and I'll make it wider going back. What that does, it makes the picture, it gives the picture perspective. So I'm going back here, and then I'm coming out wide here. And going out wide here. So that gives it perspective. So I have all the basic elements in here. I have lines. I have nice shapes to use. I know where I'm going. I have, this is this is like my sketch or my roadmap here that I can use for the picture. So I know where I'm going now. So one of the things that I like to do, and you can see it maybe a little bit better here with these paints, but sometimes it's hard to see what the colors are like with a paint set. So what I'll do is I'll make a chart like this. And this chart allows me to see all the colors for what they really look like. This is kind of hard to judge. You know, I can start mixing colors around and I really don't see what the colors really look like. So by making a little chart like that, and it only takes a little time to make a chart. So you make a chart, and that's something that you can use to help you with your painting. So I'm going to start with the light colors first, and I'm going to start with a light blue for the sky, and I'm going to test it. I can test it to make sure that my blue is not too dark. So with watercolor, the more water you add, the lighter you can make it. So there, that's a nice light blue. So I'm going to bring in those light blues for the sky in here. and just kind of put those in. Because the light colors, you want to put your light color, watercolor, you want to get your light colors in first. My board is slightly tilted down towards me so that the paint will run down a little bit. So here, and then there was a little bit of sky coming in over here, because if I don't get these in now, I won't be able to get them in later without painting them in with thick paint. And then the water going across, I want to put that in. So I got that water going across. And maybe just a couple of little areas here where the light is going through the trees. And some blue. I noticed there's some blue-green down here. So I could put a little bit of blue down here now. Even though I'm going to make it green later. So this can help me to the background trees. And I'll show you the picture. So this shape right here, I can put some of that blue in that shape, even though it's going to be green. You notice that I'm not putting the trunks of the trees in, because the trunks of the trees are dark. And this part of the paint process, this makes it gives it a little bit more fun. So all of these light greens in here, these light greens. So I'm going to put those in now. Now if you notice that the paper, this paper is white. If this was a canvas and I wanted to make my greens, I have to be very careful with my greens. And the reason is that the greens could be too bright. Well, because the paper is white, the white color of the paper influences the color. So here, I want to start with a light green, a very light green. Okay, so now I'm going to put in the light color, the light greens. And see, because I put in the light blue, now I don't have to worry about it. And put in that light green. So the light green would be where I see the light green here in the picture. That's what I'm painting now. Okay, so I'm going to put in all of the light colors now. And as you start to put in some of those colors, like those light colors, you can begin to see some of your scene. Kind of helps you to see your edges, where you're going. So you can, sometimes we say, oh, I can't see what I'm doing. But this is a good way to see what you're doing. I changed the path on my painting, so I have it going down. And put some more of that green in. And mix some more green. One thing we know about this scene, is full of green. Lots of greens in this scene, including the dark greens. So one good lesson to learn from this picture is the lesson of going from light to dark. And that's our values. We want to look at our values. And that's one of the things that really help the picture, is the values. So now I'm going in with a little bit darker green. And I'm just putting them in as if they were big shapes. And after a while, they'll start to look like the picture. without me really trying real hard. So here's where the light area is, but right next to it was a little bit darker area. And it would be hard with watercolor to try to put the light area in last. You kind of have to put that light area in first. You have to watercolor, you have to sort of like think ahead of where you want to go, your direction that you want to go in. Put some more water here, and I noticed it was a light green here around this area where the light's coming down. So I'm going to put that in, and I'm going to go over here and begin to bring in this pine tree. And you can use your brush to make your pine trees. You can kind of like go like this, make marks like that. And switch hands. The paintbrush can do most of the work for you. And kind of like go like that. So let me get some more paint. I'm gonna load up the paint. Okay, so what I did was I made these in my tray. Let me see if I can bring it over to where the picture is. See, so I mixed up a large quantity of the color, so I don't have to stop. I can just keep painting. So the bottom of the tree, look, and you can, as you work, kind of like talk to yourself about some of the things that you see in the scene. It's okay to do that. With artists, we have to talk to ourselves so we know where we're going. So I can see like the bottom of the scene. So I'm drawing, my preliminary drawing helped me a lot because I know where my trunks are, the tree trunks are. I know we were talking about how thin they would be. And then the shadow down here. Remember, the shadow's in a rounded shape, but it's not, it's kind of has a free-form shape because it's mimicking the branches of the tree at the top. So I'm going to make sure I put that in. So we put that in like that. And sometimes you can do a picture, without doing a lot of detail. When you start to see it happening, when you see the picture start to look like the picture or looking like the scene, you don't have to overdo it. Especially with watercolor, you can just kind of let some of that stuff happen. And hopefully that'll happen with this picture. That we can see some of the things happen without really overworking the picture. So here, where I put that blue down before, and I knew it was going to be green back there. Now I put the green over that blue, and now it's kind of like a bluish green because the blue is underneath. If it was white underneath, it would have a different color. It would be a different green. So I always try to think ahead, like some of the things I might want to do. And I haven't gone all the way to the real darks yet, but I'm going to get there. So everything that we do in the picture, surrounding the picture, like when I work around over here in this area of the picture, I can help bring out some of the things in this side of the tree, on this side. So I'm going to do that. And we'll go back in here. Maybe I go down to the bottom here because I didn't want to let some of that this is paint still a little wet, so let some of that paint blend in a little bit. You can see some of the scene starting to develop. But you can see like the big shape that we made before, we still have that shape. But using that shape that we had, and all this painting that we've been doing so far, it's what we call, like, I've been working on dry paper with the brush. So we'll do another watercolor where I show you how you can work with it with wet, all wet. With this one here, we have a little bit of the wet stuff going on over there, but not a whole lot. Some more this color here. Bam. So now I have this light green down here, and I can embellish it. See, if it's light like this, if I want to make it a little bit darker later, it's easier. If it was too dark, then it'd be harder for me to do it. So now I want to make this shadow area just a little bit darker. But I can also leave in some of the lighter greens in there, and the shadow even. So it's not one big flat blob down there for the shadow. And so here at the top, you can see like this scene has a lot of dark. So I'm going to bring in some of those darker shapes in the top here. And just kind of play around with the brush, let the brush kind of like make marks with the brush. Now it's like when you start bringing in the details, you just kind of let the tip of the brush dance around on the paper. And see, I get these little marks out here that begin to look like leaves, because you can't make every little leaf, but you can make it look like a leaf a little bit. These colors. So it's beginning to start to shape up. And we can go back in here and put some more darks in. More darks. Shadows. Okay, so I'm going to continue to add some of the darks in, and I'm going to gradually add some of those darks into the scene. And doing this, I can kind of define some of the edges. So I can, as I'm working, you can see that I'm using the brush strokes. Now I'm beginning to put in the detail. Before I was blocking in more, but now I am beginning to put in some meaningful marks. I'm trying to make the marks work for me. So I'm going to continue to put in some of the darks. Now the darks are going to dry. As they dry, they have a tendency to dry a little bit lighter than they appear at the beginning. So you may have to go back into it again and add some more darks into them. But you can see that there's some gestural type lines around the side of the tree that kind of help to enhance the tree. And so I'm just going ahead. Now why I say that this is the fun part, because I'm not worried about putting in the limbs and the trunk of the tree. I can just kind of like play around almost abstractly with the forms of the leaves of the tree. And I'm just kind of like, I just lay in some of those areas and just kind of like lay in some of the marks. And I try to, as much as possible, to allow the brush to do the most of the work for me. So I'm going back in and redefining some of those areas. Because I started out light, I could go back and put some of those colors down, and I don't have to worry about the darks. I always go back and refer to my chart just to kind of make sure that the colors are the colors that I want. This is a cerulean blue that I'm using in the background here. I'll just go back in and work the background with the watercolor. And you can blot it. You can use rags and towel paper to blot some of the stuff off. If you put too much color down, you can go back into it and pull color out. And that's kind of the interesting thing about with watercolor, that you can use the rag to put stuff down, take stuff up, use the water. Sometimes I'll wipe the brush off, the quantity of the wash off on the brush, went back in to the sky again because the first layer dried. It's a little bit too light, so now I went back in and established a little bit more of the blue in the sky. Again, now I'm going over to the pine tree and trying to work some of the brush marks for the pine tree, and then work the negative spaces. That means like the space between the tree and also under the tree, some of those shadows under the tree to help bring out the tree. So here we can see we're just laying in, trying to get that angle of the pine tree by angling my brush down. Please forgive me for my hand getting in the way. This is the only way that I could get this done. But you can see it here now as I work. I'm trying to get this thing to work for you. Now I go back in and putting in some of the darker colors under the tree. As the light is hitting from the sky, it's coming down the top of the tree. So I try to think about the light, and then I work around the tree edge to help bring out the tree on to the left by working on the tree to the right. And then going back into that big shape that we had before, that we established before. And so you can see how you can just continue to develop the image and bring it out by applying these colors down. And I have a very limited palette. Greens, some blues, a little bit of the yellow. But that yellow is like a very pale, handsome yellow. The greens are like sap green, and if you don't have that type of a green, you can always use Viridian, but add a little bit of yellow ochre to it to keep it earthy. So I try to keep the colors earthy in nature. For the grass, I used the back of my brush. I kind of like took the back of my brush and flicked it upward to create the grass. So here's you can see me doing it here. Kind of like flicking that grass to make the grass by using the back. So you don't have to just use the brush itself. You can also use the back of the handle, the scrape to put things down. And if you notice, I mentioned that I had different brushes. But hey, I'm using only one brush. Basically, I'm using the round, and then later on, I'll probably just switch over to a thinner round. But I didn't use the heavy brush, the thick brush. I could have, but usually I use that on a larger picture. So in this scale of the painting, I could use a smaller brush. So here I'm going back into some of those darker areas again and redefining some of the leaf work on this tree to bring it out. And you can see how those darks that I had before that appeared to be a little bit darker are not as dark. So I'm going back into them again and applying more of the darks again into the area. So I tend to work in layers with the watercolor, laying down a series of layers to enhance the image. Kind of helps to bring out the luminousness of the color. So here, you make it dark without making the paint opaque. You don't want it to look opaque. You want it to be dark without being opaque. It's kind of like playing around with the colors. And if you want to try something on a separate sheet of paper, try to make it some darks. Just make it working with darks and see how dark you can get it without making them opaque. See if you can keep it looking translucent but dark. So kind of like movement around the picture. So I worked on the right. Now I'm moving over to the left. And one of the things as a visual artist, what we try to do is to try to look at a picture as a whole. So I don't get caught up in just working in one area. I try to work in a number of different areas at the same time. So here I'm going to go back in, and I took a little bit of alizarin crimson and laid it in for the darks with the green, just a little bit over the green, the blue green there, just to kind of give it a little touch, a little heat. The color has temperature to it, so I'd like to bring that color forward a little bit. I just brought in a little bit of that alizarin. Sometimes I like to use a little bit of alizarin in the sky too, and touch it around in different places. So it's like using a complement without going overboard with the complement. So you can see palette is very limited. The key thing with this painting is value. You know, I really tried to really stress just working with value. So the values really help to enhance the things that are going on in the image. So here I'm just throwing a little bit more of the reds in there. I'll probably go and blot them out a little bit so that they're not too strong or overpowering in the image. So it kind of gives it a little bit of color. Now I'm going to put in some of the more green in the foreground. And you can see that the green is a little bit more intensive. And the path, I create the path by not painting the path, but painting around the path. So I paint around the path to create the path, and it kind of brings the path out. The path is like, I hate to just say a tool, but it's a means for bringing in perspective. So by bringing the path, putting that in there, it helps to bring in a perspective and bring you into the picture, brings you back into the background from the foreground. And also the darks that are used in the foreground kind of help bring that picture towards you a little bit more. It brings you back into the space. So here I'm just going to wash some of those shadow areas over the path. And those shadows that are under the tree, I just kind of lay those in so that each tree has its own little shadow. So that you can see like the shadows are already established on the trees. Now you notice I didn't put in any now I'm working on the trunk. See, I didn't even work on the trunks before. Now this is like the final detail. And as I'm working in there, what I like to do is, the reason why I like to work with the trunk last, because I can skip around as I'm going up through the leaves, because you want to have some of the leaves appearing as though they're in front of the branches, and some of them appearing as they're going towards the back of the branches. So the lines that I'm using are more or less like hash lines. So like some of the leaves are forward, some are going towards the back. So it makes it a little bit more natural. You don't want to have the limbs, all of the limbs in front of the trees or in front of the leaves, and you can't put the limbs and the trunk down like you would an oil painting, because you can't put the paint on in such a way that it will cover over the branches. So in this case, this works out well. This also works out well if you're working with acrylic paint, because sometimes you may have like a cheap acrylic paint. If you're not using a decent quality acrylic paint, you'll find that it's hard to apply an opaque color over a dark color. So if you paint your leaf forms first, then you can have those branches peeking through. And if you're using an inexpensive paint, you can still come out with an effective looking painting. Remember, acrylic painting can mimic watercolor. You can do the thick and the thin. You can play around with it and still capture some of the similar elements in it that you see here with the watercolor. Now, often people want to do watercolor. They say, oh, they figure that it must be easier, especially if they see me just going through it. But they have a tendency, like the watercolor, using it too thick, or not allowing the washes to have a kind of freedom to them. So, in whatever you do, try and just kind of explore, play around, do a lot of them. Go outside, look at nature, see some of the things that are going on in nature. You notice, like with the trunks of the trees, I'm using like a gray-green color. And in some of the foregrounds, I warmed them up a little bit. When I move over to the right, I'm going to warm up some of those branches a little. But you can see now it's starting to look more like a landscape with trees. And you don't want to make the trunks of the trees too thick, because if you do that, it'll appear as though you have it'll look like broccolis out there instead of looking like trees. So you're better to have your trunks of the trees too thin than to have them too thick. If you make them very thick, then you have to really think about the scale of the tree. So if the scale of the tree is like extremely large, then you can go ahead and use like a thicker trunk of the tree. Or if you want to bring something really close to the foreground, you could do that. But you can see that here I'm using like fairly, thin branches and fairly thin trunks of the trees to show the image. And so here I'm just kind of like picking through, looking. I have the thinner brush now, and put in some of those branches here. Now I just switch over so that I can get some of those thin branches. And I'm just kind of like working the tip of my brush a little bit as I'm doing this. So painting is fun. You can make it. You can make the painting work for you. You can have fun in the process. Went back in and worked in the grass with a little thin brush. I'm just touching areas. I'm not trying to paint all of it. Just enough to give the impression of the landscape. So the next step after all of this is done is to take it and just do few more little details and do a little blotting. You can look at a painting, you can say, wow, a painting is never done, but eventually it has to be done. Now the unveiling. You're taking off the tape, and it's something about that. It just looks so much better when you see it with the white border on it, and showing the image of the painting. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you were able to gain something, or I hope this helped you in some way in working with the landscape painting. Take care. Give it a try.